10 Reasons Power Begets Power by David Russo. Chapter 1. The Momentum of Influence. An object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced external force. Isaac Newton. Influence behaves the same way. Once it begins to move, it tends to carry itself forward unless something stops it. Power rarely appears all at once. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, and then accelerates. One small advantage leads to another, and before long, influence seems to move under its own force. This is the central truth of power. It has momentum. Momentum is not charisma, talent, or intelligence, though it can include all three. Momentum is what happens after those traits are noticed. It is the accumulation of attention, belief, and expectation. When people begin to assume your relevance, doors open before you even reach for them. When institutions believe you matter, they treat you as if you will continue to matter. And that belief, once established, becomes self-reinforcing. Think of power as a flywheel. At first, it is heavy and uncooperative. The early pushes require disproportionate effort. Progress is slow, discouraging, and often invisible to outsiders. But once the wheel starts turning, each rotation adds energy to the next. Eventually, the system moves with such force that stopping it becomes far harder than keeping it going. Influence works the same way. Once someone gains a measure of visibility, whether through success, position, or association, others begin to pay attention. Attention creates familiarity. Familiarity creates trust, even when that trust is not fully earned. And trust creates opportunity. Each step feeds the next, creating a loop that compounds over time. This is why power rarely remains static. People do not evaluate influence in isolation. They evaluate it socially. If others treat someone as important, they infer that importance must be deserved. This is not cynicism, it is efficiency. Human beings rely on social cues to navigate complexity. In crowded systems, we look to signals of consensus to decide where to invest our attention, loyalty, and resources. Momentum turns influence into a shortcut. Consider how quickly perception shifts once someone is labeled a leader, a winner, or an authority. Their words carry more weight. Their mistakes are forgiven more easily. Their presence alone changes the dynamics of a room. Not because their underlying abilities suddenly improved, but because expectations did. Expectations are powerful forces. They shape behavior on both sides of the interaction. The influential person speaks with more confidence because they are listened to. Others listen more closely because they expect value. This mutual reinforcement accelerates influence far beyond what raw competence alone could achieve. This is why early success matters so much. Not because it proves superiority, but because it initiates motion. Institutions understand this intuitively. Media outlets focus on those already in the spotlight. Investors fund founders who have raised money before. Employers hire candidates from prestigious organizations. These choices are framed as rational risk management, but they also reveal a deeper truth. Momentum feels safer than potential. What is already moving appears more reliable than what is still. As a result, influence compounds faster than almost any other human asset. Skills require time to develop. Knowledge must be earned. Relationships must be maintained. But influence grows exponentially once it reaches a critical mass. Each additional endorsement, appearance, or success does not add, it multiplies. Visibility begets credibility. Credibility begets access. Access begets more visibility. This compounding effect explains why power often appears unfair. From the outside, it can seem as though certain individuals are constantly offered opportunities they did nothing to earn, while others struggle endlessly despite equal or greater merit. But the system is not rewarding effort. It is rewarding momentum. Momentum changes how risk is perceived. A powerful figure attempting something new is seen as bold. A powerless one attempting the same thing is seen as reckless. The action is identical. The interpretation is not. Power reframes behavior before it is even judged. Importantly, momentum does not require moral worth. History is filled with examples of influence accumulating around individuals and institutions that were deeply flawed. Power is not a measure of virtue. It is a measure of movement, of how many forces are already aligned in your favor. Once aligned, those forces are difficult to resist. This is why power is so often misunderstood. People search for the single trait that explains success: intelligence, confidence, discipline, luck. But the real driver is continuity. Influence persists because it carries itself forward. Those who have it are pulled along by systems, perceptions, and expectations that no longer require constant effort to maintain. Understanding this is not an invitation to cynicism. It is an invitation to clarity. If power has momentum, then the earliest stages matter more than they appear. Small wins are not small. Visibility is not vanity. Consistency is not repetition, it is acceleration. The goal is not domination, but motion. Once motion exists, influence begins to work on your behalf. Power, once in motion, rarely stops on its own. And that is why power so often begets more power. Chapter 2. Access opens more doors than talent alone. Talent is admired. Access is decisive. Societies like to believe they reward merit, that the most capable rise naturally to the top. Skill, intelligence, and effort are celebrated as the engines of success. Yet in practice, opportunity rarely flows to those who are merely capable. It flows to those who are present in the right rooms, near the right people, at the right moments. That presence is access, and access is one of the most powerful accelerants of influence. Access determines what you can even attempt. Two individuals may possess identical talent, ambition, and work ethic. One has entry into decision-making spaces, meetings where strategies are set, investments approved, and narratives shaped. The other remains outside, learning only after choices have already been made. Over time, the difference between them becomes enormous, not because one worked harder, but because one had proximity to opportunity. This is the access escalator. Once you step onto it, progress becomes easier, faster, and more continuous. Access begins modestly. An introduction, an invitation, a recommendation. Often it is framed as a courtesy rather than a privilege. But each moment of access expands awareness of how power actually functions, of who influences whom, of what is valued and what is ignored. This knowledge alone provides leverage that outsiders lack. Inside access changes perspective. Those with access stop guessing what matters and start knowing. They hear priorities discussed before they become public. They learn the unspoken rules that govern advancement. They see which behaviors are rewarded and which are tolerated. This information is rarely written down, yet it governs outcomes far more than formal criteria ever do. Once inside, access multiplies. Being in the room leads to being remembered. Being remembered leads to being trusted. Being trusted leads to being included again. Over time, access becomes normalized. What once felt exclusive begins to feel expected. And when access becomes habitual, it transforms into influence. This is why talent alone so often plateaus. Talent can open a door, but access decides how many doors exist. Without access, talent must repeatedly prove itself from scratch. With access, talent is assumed. The burden of demonstration shifts. Those inside are given the benefit of the doubt. Those outside are asked for proof again and again. Access also reframes risk. Decision-makers prefer familiar faces. When choices carry uncertainty, they lean toward people they have already seen, spoken with, or endorsed. This is not favoritism in the emotional sense. It is psychological comfort. Familiarity reduces perceived risk, and access creates familiarity faster than excellence ever could. Over time, access reshapes opportunity distribution itself. Opportunities are often discussed long before they are announced. Positions are imagined with specific people in mind. Deals are structured around existing relationships. By the time something becomes open, its outcome is frequently already influenced by who had access early. This is how small advantages become structural. A single early introduction can lead to a first opportunity. That opportunity leads to a title, credential, or visible success. That success becomes justification for further access. The system then points to the outcome as evidence of merit, ignoring the invisible ladder that made the climb possible. Importantly, access does not eliminate the need for competence, but it changes the order of operations. Without access, competence must come first and still may not be enough. With access, competence can come second and still be rewarded. This is not corruption. It is how complex systems manage trust. They rely on proximity, reputation, and continuity far more than abstract evaluations of ability. This explains why powerful individuals invest so heavily in maintaining access. They attend events not for enjoyment, but for presence. They nurture relationships not for affection, but for continuity. They understand that being seen consistently matters as much as being capable. Access is also cumulative across generations and institutions. Families, schools, companies, and communities transmit access quietly. Children grow up observing how power speaks, behaves, and negotiates. Networks are inherited before they are earned. This does not guarantee success, but it dramatically reduces friction. The escalator starts higher for some than for others. Yet access is not immutable. While it is easier to maintain than to acquire, access can be built deliberately. Visibility, reliability, and alignment with existing power structures often matter more than brilliance. Those who understand this stop asking only, "How can I improve?" and begin asking, "Where can I position myself?" That shift in thinking is transformative. Power does not simply reward the best performers. It rewards those closest to decision-making gravity. Access brings proximity. Proximity brings opportunity. Opportunity, repeated enough times, creates power. Talent may open a door once. Access decides how many doors you'll ever see. Chapter 3: Networks form around power. Power is rarely solitary. Wherever influence exists, networks emerge. Human beings are social strategists by nature. We instinctively orient ourselves toward people and institutions that appear stable, capable, and resource-rich. This instinct is ancient. In uncertain environments, aligning with strength increases survival. In modern societies, the same impulse shapes careers, alliances, and entire industries. Power, like gravity, pulls others toward it. Networks do not form randomly. They form around perceived centers of influence. When someone gains power, through position, reputation, or success, others begin to orbit them. Collaborators seek proximity. Advisors offer guidance. Opportunists look for alignment. Even critics fixate their attention there. Power becomes a focal point, and attention becomes infrastructure. This is how networks begin, not with intention, but with attraction. Once people cluster around power, the benefits multiply. Each additional connection increases the value of the network for everyone involved. Information travels faster. Resources move more efficiently. Opportunities surface earlier. What started as influence becomes coordination. This coordination is a force multiplier. A powerful individual with no network is limited by their own capacity. A powerful individual surrounded by a network operates through others. Decisions propagate. Ideas scale. Effort is distributed. The network becomes an extension of the power itself. Importantly, networks reinforce power even when the central figure is absent. Relationships between members persist. Norms solidify. Shared language develops. Over time, the network takes on a life of its own, sustaining influence beyond any single interaction. This is why institutions, not just individuals, accumulate enduring power. Their networks outlast personalities. Networks also create insulation. When power is challenged, networks respond. Allies defend reputation. Partners absorb shocks. Supporters reinterpret failures as temporary setbacks. This buffering effect allows powerful figures to survive mistakes that would end others. The network does not eliminate consequences, but it softens them. This is one reason power appears resilient to disruption. Outsiders often assume that removing a leader dismantles their influence. In reality, the network often preserves it. Successors emerge. Loyalists remain. The structure holds. Power is less about the person than the relationships surrounding them. Networks also regulate access. They act as filters, deciding who gets close and who remains distant. Invitations, recommendations, and endorsements flow through network pathways. This protects the center from overload while maintaining control. Entry is rarely open. It is mediated by trust, familiarity, and perceived alignment. Once inside a network, status changes. Being connected to power confers legitimacy. Names carry weight by association. Introductions matter more than credentials. The network itself becomes a signal, one that others recognize and respond to. Influence becomes transferable within the group. This is why people invest heavily in maintaining network position. They show up consistently. They reinforce shared values. They avoid open conflict. The goal is not constant advancement, but permanence. Staying connected often matters more than moving up. Networks also explain why power clusters. Industries, cities, and institutions tend to concentrate influence rather than distribute it evenly. Once a hub forms, it attracts more talent, capital, and attention, further strengthening the network. Competing centers struggle to emerge because the gravitational pull of the existing one is already so strong. This concentration is not accidental, it is structural. Networks reward proximity and continuity. Those already near the center benefit most. Those far away face higher costs to participate. Over time, the gap widens and power becomes geographically, socially, and economically concentrated. Yet networks are not purely exclusive. They require renewal. New members bring energy, skills, and legitimacy. Powerful networks expand selectively, absorbing individuals who enhance their reach or stability. This creates the appearance of openness while maintaining control. Understanding this dynamic changes how power is pursued. Those who focus only on individual achievement miss the larger mechanism. Power grows through connection, not isolation. It is cultivated by becoming useful, visible, and reliable within existing networks, or by building new ones around emerging influence. Networks do not form around ideas alone. They form around people and institutions that demonstrate staying power. And once a network forms, it becomes one of the strongest engines of power there is, self-reinforcing, adaptive, and remarkably difficult to displace. Power may begin with a person, but it endures through the network that forms around them. Chapter 4: Credibility Compounds. Credibility is one of the most underestimated forces in power. It is often confused with competence, but the two are not the same. Competence is what you can do. Credibility is what others believe you can do. And in systems governed by perception, belief shapes outcomes faster than reality ever could. Credibility compounds because once it is established, it accelerates trust. The first visible success is the hardest to earn. Before it exists, every claim is speculative. Every promise is unproven. Skepticism is the default. But after a single public win, one promotion, one profitable decision, one well-executed project, the narrative shifts. The question changes from "can they do this?" to "what will they do next?" That shift is everything. People are far more willing to extend trust to those with a track record, even if that track record is narrow. One success is often treated as evidence of many underlying qualities: intelligence, discipline, judgment, leadership. Whether or not those qualities are fully present matters less than the fact that they are now assumed. Assumption reduces friction. When credibility is high, explanations shorten. Oversight loosens. Approval speeds up. Others stop scrutinizing every detail and begin filling in gaps on your behalf. This is not negligence. It is cognitive efficiency. In complex environments, people rely on signals of reliability to conserve attention. Credibility is one of the strongest signals there is. This is why those seen as credible are allowed to experiment, pivot, and even fail. Their missteps are framed as learning experiences. Their intentions are trusted. Their future potential outweighs their present mistakes. Meanwhile, those without credibility must operate perfectly just to remain in place. The same action is judged differently depending on who performs it. Credibility also shapes how stories are told. When credible individuals speak, their words are quoted. Their opinions are circulated. Their interpretations become reference points. Over time, they stop reacting to narratives and start generating them. Their perspective becomes the lens through which events are understood. This narrative authority is a form of power. It means being believed not only about what happened, but about what matters. Credible voices frame priorities, define success, and establish standards. Others align themselves accordingly, often without realizing it. Importantly, credibility compounds even in the absence of constant achievement. Past success lingers. Titles endure. Reputations persist long after the conditions that created them have changed. This creates a time lag between performance and perception, one that almost always favors those already established. This lag is why power is sticky. Once credibility is attached to a name, organization, or brand, it resists erosion. Challenges must be repeated, undeniable, and sustained to override it. For those without credibility, the burden is reversed. Proof must be constant, flawless, and ongoing. Credibility also transfers. Association with credible people elevates perception. Endorsements matter. Shared platforms signal legitimacy. Networks amplify this effect, allowing credibility to circulate within trusted circles. This is how influence spreads faster than individual achievement ever could. Yet credibility is not neutral. It is shaped by visibility, timing, and context as much as by merit. Some successes are amplified while others go unnoticed. Some failures are forgiven while others are fatal. Credibility reflects how systems choose to remember, not just what actually occurred. Understanding this does not diminish its power, it clarifies it. Those who grasp how credibility compounds focus strategically on when and where they perform, not just how. They recognize that early visible wins matter disproportionately. They protect their reputation carefully, knowing it operates as leverage long after the effort that created it has passed. Credibility is slow to build and fast to deploy. It turns trust into a renewable resource. It reduces resistance. It bends interpretation in your favor. Over time, it becomes a form of stored influence, one that can be spent, reinvested, or leveraged to gain access, resources, and authority. Power does not require constant proof. Once credibility is established, belief does much of the work. And belief, when repeated and shared, compounds into lasting power. Afterward, why credibility accelerates power. Chapter 4 showed that credibility compounds. Here's why that makes power grow on its own once it exists. 1. Visible wins shift perception. Once someone is seen to succeed, their future actions are assumed competent. This assumption reduces friction and allows influence to expand automatically. 2. Depth creates leverage. Credibility concentrated in one domain spreads naturally. Power does not grow evenly. It compounds where trust already exists. 3. Completion signals reliability. Those who finish what others abandon attract opportunities effortlessly. Others extend trust, giving them access to resources and decisions that multiply influence. 4. Association multiplies effect. Being linked to credible people or institutions amplifies perceived authority. Networks carry credibility further than any single act could. 5. Predictable judgment attracts reliance. Consistent patterns of decision-making allow others to act with confidence, often delegating authority. The more predictable the competence, the faster power accumulates. 6. Reputation filters risk. Credible individuals are given room to experiment. Missteps are reframed as learning. This asymmetric tolerance accelerates their rise relative to those without credibility. 7. Words gain weight. When credible people speak, their statements shape narratives. Influence spreads not just through actions, but through perception and storytelling. 8. Credibility compounds silently. Past success continues to generate opportunities long after the original effort. Power is sticky, and belief lingers longer than performance. In short, credibility turns trust into a renewable resource. It bends interpretation in your favor, accelerates opportunities, and multiplies influence without requiring constant proof. Power does not just come from doing well. It comes from being believed to do well, again and again. Chapter 5. Control of resources shapes outcomes. Power is most visible in moments of decision, but it is built long before them, through control of resources. Resources determine what is possible. Capital, time, labor, data, technology, and attention are the raw materials of influence. Those who control them do not merely participate in outcomes. They shape the range of outcomes that can exist at all. This is why resource control is one of the most reliable foundations of power. Resources create asymmetry. When one actor has access to more tools than another, the contest is no longer equal. They can act faster, endure longer, and recover more easily. They can absorb losses that would end others. This resilience changes behavior. The powerful can take risks precisely because failure is survivable. Risk tolerance is a hidden advantage. Those with limited resources must choose carefully. Every mistake is costly. Every delay matters. Those with abundant resources can experiment, iterate, and pivot. Over time, this flexibility produces better outcomes, not because of superior judgment, but because of more attempts. Resources by time. Time is one of the most undervalued assets in power dynamics. The ability to wait, to outlast competitors, postpone decisions, or endure uncertainty often determines victory. Those without resources are forced into urgency. Those with them can afford patience. In many arenas, patience wins. Resource control also directs attention. Money funds visibility. Data informs strategy. Labor executes vision. Platforms amplify messages. With resources, powerful individuals and institutions decide what is seen, discussed, and prioritized. They shape the environment in which others must operate. This environmental control is subtle but profound. Rather than reacting to conditions, the powerful create them. They set terms, define metrics, and establish norms. Others adjust accordingly, often mistaking adaptation for choice. Importantly, resources do not just enable action, they protect against consequences. Legal teams, advisors, buffers, and redundancies exist to reduce exposure. When errors occur, they are contained. When controversies arise, they are managed. This insulation allows the powerful to operate with confidence while others operate with caution. Over time, this difference compounds. Those with resources learn more because they can afford feedback. They fail safely. They invest in learning systems, analytics, consultants, research that sharpen decision-making. Meanwhile, those without resources must rely on intuition and hope. Resources also influence credibility. Well-funded efforts are perceived as serious. Well-resourced organizations are trusted more readily. Investment itself becomes a signal of legitimacy, attracting further support. This creates a loop in which resources attract belief, and belief attracts more resources. This is how power consolidates. Once resources are centralized, they tend to stay that way. Control enables reinvestment. Returns flow back to the center. Barriers to entry rise. Competitors struggle not because they lack ideas, but because they lack the means to sustain execution. Resource control also shapes morality. Those with resources can frame their actions as strategic, visionary, or necessary. Those without are judged as reckless or irresponsible for similar behavior. Power influences not just outcomes, but interpretations of intent. Understanding this dynamic is essential for anyone seeking to build or challenge power. It reveals why effort alone is insufficient, why fairness feels elusive, why outcomes so often favor those who already have advantages. Power does not reward struggle, it rewards leverage. Yet resource control is not purely extractive. When wielded responsibly, it can create scale, stability, and opportunity for others. Resources can fund innovation, support communities, and reduce risk across systems. The difference lies not in possession, but in application. Those who understand power aim to move from dependency to control. They seek not just income, but reserves. Not just activity, but assets. Not just participation, but ownership. They recognize that influence grows strongest where resources can be directed intentionally and sustained over time. In the end, power is not about having more choices in the moment. It is about having more options over time. And nothing expands future options more reliably than control of resources. Chapter 6. Social proof reinforces hierarchy. Human beings rarely decide alone. Even when we believe our judgments are independent, they are deeply shaped by what we see others do, believe, and endorse. This tendency, known as social proof, is one of the most powerful psychological forces sustaining hierarchy. When people observe many others following someone, they infer that person must be worth following. Power, once visible, validates itself. Social proof is efficiency disguised as consensus. In complex environments, individuals cannot evaluate everything from first principles. Instead, they look for signals that reduce uncertainty. Popularity, endorsement, and repetition serve as shortcuts. If many people agree, the thinking goes, the conclusion must be sound. This logic reinforces existing power. Those at the top are seen more often, discussed more frequently, and referenced more widely. Each mention becomes evidence. Each follower becomes confirmation. Over time, visibility itself becomes proof of legitimacy, independent of underlying merit. This is how hierarchy stabilizes. Leaders are followed not only because of authority, but because others are already following them. Institutions are trusted not only because of performance, but because they are widely trusted. The collective behavior of the group becomes the justification for its own continuation. Social proof also lowers resistance. People hesitate to challenge what appears broadly accepted. Dissent feels risky when consensus seems overwhelming. As a result, dominant narratives persist longer than they deserve, and alternative perspectives struggle to gain traction. This dynamic explains why power can survive mediocrity. Once someone is widely recognized as successful, their future actions are interpreted generously. Ambiguity is resolved in their favor. Failure is reframed as an exception. Meanwhile, newcomers face skepticism regardless of quality. Social proof shields incumbents and burdens outsiders. Visibility magnifies this effect. Media, platforms, and institutions amplify signals of popularity. Metrics, followers, rankings, ratings, awards, quantify approval and make it appear objective. These numbers shape perception, guiding attention toward those who already have it. The result is recursive. Attention creates attention. Endorsement attracts endorsement. The visible grow more visible. Over time, hierarchy hardens, not through coercion, but through repetition. Social proof also explains conformity within power structures. Individuals inside hierarchies often align their behavior with perceived norms, even when privately uncertain. Agreement becomes safer than dissent. Silence becomes compliance. The appearance of unity strengthens authority, regardless of internal disagreement. This collective alignment further entrenches power. Importantly, social proof does not require conscious manipulation. It operates automatically. People imitate because imitation feels safe. Following the crowd reduces personal responsibility. If many believe it, it must be acceptable. This is why power appears natural. Hierarchy comes to feel like the way things are, not the result of accumulated signals. Over time, people forget that authority was once contested. It simply becomes assumed. Yet social proof can shift. When enough visible behavior changes, perception follows. Movements emerge when new signals accumulate. Challengers gain traction when others are seen supporting them. Power can erode quickly once the appearance of consensus cracks. This fragility is often overlooked. Those who understand social proof protect appearances carefully. They cultivate endorsement, manage optics, and maintain visibility. They know that losing symbolic support can be more dangerous than losing material strength. For those seeking influence, the lesson is clear. Being excellent is not enough. Being seen, being chosen matters. Early adopters, public support, and visible alignment accelerate legitimacy. People follow those who appear to be followed. For those seeking change, the lesson is equally clear. Disrupting power requires disrupting perception. It requires creating visible alternatives, not just better arguments. Social proof must be redirected, not merely challenged. Hierarchy is not maintained solely by force or law. It is maintained by belief. And belief, once shared widely enough, becomes self-sustaining power. Chapter 7. Systems protect their own leaders. Power lasts longest when it becomes embedded in systems. Individuals rise and fall, but systems endure. Governments, corporations, industries, and social institutions are designed, intentionally or not, to prioritize stability. And stability almost always means preserving existing leadership. Once power is institutionalized, it no longer depends on constant effort from the individual at the top. The system itself begins to do the work. Systems reward predictability. From a systems perspective, change is risk. New leadership introduces uncertainty, different priorities, unfamiliar methods, unpredictable consequences. Even flawed leaders are often preferable to unknown ones. As a result, systems develop mechanisms that favor continuity over disruption. These mechanisms are subtle. Rules, procedures, and norms accumulate over time, often shaped by those already in power. What appears neutral on the surface frequently reflects historical advantage. Promotion criteria, performance metrics, legal frameworks, and governance structures tend to align with the strengths of incumbents. This alignment is not accidental. Leaders influence the systems they oversee, and systems adapt to protect what they already know. Over time, the organization becomes optimized around the current power structure. Challengers are measured by standards they did not design, while incumbents are evaluated by standards that reflect their own path to power. Systems also distribute responsibility. Decisions are spread across committees, processes, and protocols. This diffusion makes power harder to confront. When outcomes are questioned, no single actor appears fully accountable. Authority becomes abstract, shielded by structure. This abstraction protects leaders. Criticism is redirected toward procedures. Failures are framed as systemic rather than personal. Accountability slows, softens, or disappears altogether. Meanwhile, leaders benefit from the system's legitimacy while remaining insulated from its consequences. Systems also control advancement. They decide who is trained, promoted, funded, or recognized. Talent is filtered through institutional pathways that reward compliance and alignment. Those who challenge the system often stall, not because they lack ability, but because they lack endorsement. This creates self-selection. Individuals who thrive within the system tend to resemble existing leadership in mindset, behavior, and values. Over time, leadership becomes homogeneous, not necessarily in appearance, but in perspective. The system reproduces itself. Once this cycle is established, power becomes entrenched. Removing a leader without altering the system rarely changes outcomes. Successors inherit the same incentives, constraints, and protections. The system absorbs disruption and reasserts familiar patterns. This is why reform is difficult. Meaningful change requires altering structures, not just replacing people. But structures are defended by those who benefit from them, and those individuals often control the levers of change. The system resists threats under the guise of neutrality. Stability becomes the moral argument. Preserving order, continuity, and efficiency is framed as responsibility. Disruption is cast as dangerous or reckless. Even well-founded criticism is dismissed as impractical. The system presents itself as the only viable option. Yet systems are not invincible. They rely on legitimacy, on the belief that their rules are fair and their leaders deserve authority. When legitimacy erodes, systems strain. Rules lose moral force. Compliance weakens. What once felt permanent becomes negotiable. Those who understand power recognize this tension. They know that systems protect leaders until they no longer can. They invest in reinforcing legitimacy through performance, narrative, and inclusion. They manage perception as carefully as outcomes. For those seeking influence, the lesson is sobering. Advancing within a system often requires alignment before change. Challenging power from outside is possible, but difficult. Challenging it from within requires patience, strategy, and an understanding of how protection operates. Power that lives only in a person is fragile. Power that lives in a system is resilient. And once a system begins protecting its leaders, power can persist long after the reasons for it have faded. Chapter 8. The Amplification Effect of Wealth. Wealth is not merely a reward of power. It is one of its most effective accelerants. Money changes scale. It expands reach, compresses time, and reduces friction. While influence can exist without wealth, the presence of financial resources dramatically amplifies how far and how fast power travels. This is why wealth and power so often appear together, locked in a reinforcing cycle. Wealth increases optionality. Those with money have more choices and fewer constraints. They can pursue multiple paths simultaneously, abandon failing efforts without collapse, and wait for favorable conditions. This flexibility is not indulgence. It is strategic advantage. Power grows strongest where survival is not constantly at stake. Wealth also changes risk calculus. Financial security allows for bolder decisions. Investments can be larger. Horizons can be longer. Losses become manageable rather than catastrophic. Over time, this tolerance for risk produces disproportionate returns, not because of superior insight, but because of repeated opportunity. This repetition compounds. Those with wealth can place many bets. They learn faster because they can afford experimentation. They refine strategy through feedback, while others must rely on a single attempt. The gap widens not through brilliance, but through volume. Wealth also purchases influence indirectly. It funds platforms, advisors, lobbying, legal protection, and narrative control. It buys access to expertise and decision-makers. It transforms private preference into public impact. With enough capital, individual opinion can reshape markets, policies, and cultural conversations. This is amplification, not creation. Money does not invent power from nothing. It magnifies existing leverage. A respected voice becomes louder. A connected individual becomes more central. A credible institution becomes more dominant. Wealth accelerates trajectories already in motion. Wealth also stabilizes power. Financial reserves act as shock absorbers. Crises that would destroy others become inconveniences. Setbacks are absorbed, reputations repaired, operations sustained. This durability makes wealthy actors appear inevitable, further reinforcing their authority. Perception matters here. Stability signals competence. Endurance is interpreted as strength. As a result, wealth attracts trust, which attracts more opportunity, which generates more wealth. The loop tightens. Wealth shapes narratives as well. Those with resources can influence how stories are told and which stories are heard. Media ownership, sponsorships, philanthropy, and branding all guide public attention. This framing often casts wealth as evidence of merit, further legitimizing power. Importantly, wealth also influences morality. Actions taken by the wealthy are often described as strategic, innovative, or visionary. Similar actions by the less resourced are labeled irresponsible or unethical. Power reframes judgment, and wealth reinforces that reframing. This dynamic explains why inequality persists. Wealth is not simply accumulated, it is protected. Tax structures, financial instruments, and institutional norms preserve advantage across time. Returns flow more easily to those who already have capital, while others face higher costs and lower margins. Yet wealth is not inherently corrosive. Like all forms of power, its impact depends on intent and governance. Wealth can enable large-scale solutions, fund innovation, and reduce systemic risk. It can create opportunity rather than merely concentrate it. The danger lies in opacity. When the amplification effect of wealth is misunderstood or ignored, power appears natural rather than constructed. Outcomes seem deserved rather than engineered. This obscures accountability and limits meaningful challenge. For those seeking power, the lesson is pragmatic. Financial leverage multiplies effort. Ownership outperforms income. Reserves outperform speed. Wealth is not about excess. It is about endurance and reach. For those seeking reform, the lesson is structural. Addressing power requires understanding how wealth amplifies influence beyond visibility or talent. Without addressing financial leverage, other interventions struggle to scale. Power does not move at the speed of ideas alone. It moves at the speed of capital, and wealth, once accumulated, ensures that power echoes farther, lasts longer, and returns stronger than before. Chapter 9. Narratives shape reality. Power is sustained not only by what happens, but by how what happens is explained. Human beings understand the world through stories. Facts matter, but meaning determines impact. Narratives organize complexity, assign responsibility, and define what is normal, admirable, or unacceptable. Those who shape these stories do more than influence opinion. They shape reality itself. Powerful individuals and institutions understand this intuitively. They do not wait for events to speak for themselves. They frame them. Success becomes evidence of vision. Failure becomes proof of courage or experimentation. Conflict becomes misunderstanding rather than wrongdoing. Through narrative, power interprets itself to the world. Narratives determine legitimacy. When a story aligns power with shared values, progress, security, innovation, fairness, it feels deserved. Authority becomes moral, not just practical. People comply not because they are forced to, but because the story makes compliance feel reasonable. This is a deeper form of control. Coercion demands energy. Narrative conserves it. When people believe in the story, they enforce it on themselves and others. Dissent becomes socially costly. Alternative explanations sound irrational or extreme. Narratives also compress time. They link past, present, and future into a coherent arc. A leader is not judged only on today's actions, but on the story of who they have been and where they are supposedly going. This continuity protects power during periods of uncertainty. Stories forgive inconsistency. Contradictions are reinterpreted as evolution. Broken promises become necessary adjustments. The narrative absorbs tension and maintains coherence. Without a competing story, power remains intact. Control of narrative also controls attention. What is discussed shapes what is ignored. By emphasizing certain issues, values, or threats, Powerful actors guide public focus away from others. Silence becomes as influential as speech. Absence shapes perception just as strongly as presence. Media is central to this process. Visibility determines relevance. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates belief. Those with power gain easier access to platforms, and platforms amplify power in return. The loop reinforces itself. Yet narratives do not require total dominance. They only require being default. If one story is widely repeated and alternatives are fragmented, the dominant narrative prevails. People adopt it not because they are convinced, but because it is what they hear most often. This explains why power invests heavily in storytelling. Branding, messaging, slogans, and symbolism are not superficial. They are strategic. They simplify complexity into digestible meaning. They turn institutions into identities and policies into values. Narratives also define success and failure. They establish what counts as progress, who deserves credit, and which outcomes are acceptable. By setting these standards, power controls evaluation itself. Winning is defined in ways that favor those already winning. Importantly, narratives shape self-perception. People internalize stories about what is possible for them, where they belong, and what they should aspire to. These internalized limits are among the most powerful constraints of all. Power does not need to block action if belief does the work. Yet narratives are not immutable. They weaken when reality consistently contradicts them. They fracture when alternative stories gain coherence and visibility. Change begins when new narratives offer better explanations, not just louder objections. Those who challenge power effectively do not only argue facts. They tell better stories. They reframe events, expose contradictions, and articulate new meanings that resonate emotionally and morally. Without this narrative shift, structural change struggles to take hold. For those who hold power, the responsibility is significant. Narratives can justify exploitation or inspire progress. They can exclude or unite. They can conceal harm or illuminate truth. Storytelling is never neutral. In the end, power is not only exercised through action. It is exercised through interpretation. And those who control the story do more than describe reality, they define it. Chapter 10: Power attracts more power. At the highest tiers of influence, power functions like gravity. It pulls people, capital, and opportunity toward it, not mainly through force, but through visibility, organization, and accumulated momentum. Those who hold power seldom stand alone. They occupy the center of interconnected systems, stories, and relationships that continuously reinforce their position. Recognizing this compounding process is key to understanding how power grows and why it becomes so resistant to disruption once established. The first thing power draws is allegiance. People are naturally inclined to orient themselves toward perceived success. We subconsciously search for signals of competence, safety, and advantage, and power provides those signals. When someone appears influential, others gravitate toward them for guidance, partnership, security, or proximity. This behavior is not superficial admiration. It is an adaptive strategy. Associating with power increases access while minimizing uncertainty. As alignment grows, so does momentum. Each additional supporter enhances legitimacy, reach, and authority. Perception feeds on itself. Widespread attraction is taken as evidence of worth, accuracy, or inevitability. Networks widen, doors open, and influence begins to scale faster than any individual could manage alone. Over time, what started as belief becomes materially true. Resources and narrative control intensify this cycle. Money allows influence to expand, initiatives to multiply, and environments to be shaped in ways that invite further participation. Proximity to decision-makers keeps opportunities circulating within the same sphere, while dominance over messaging ensures actions are interpreted favorably. These forces reinforce one another, producing a loop that hardens power into something enduring. Institutions then lock it in. Organizations, governments, and cultural norms are often structured to protect those already at the top. Policies evolve to favor incumbents. Traditions normalize their authority, and informal barriers discourage challengers. Power stops being personal and becomes systemic, embedded within the rules and expectations that govern participation. Even setbacks rarely dismantle it. The structure remains. Human psychology completes the reinforcement. Success biases perception. The powerful are assumed to be capable, their decisions granted leniency, their track record emphasized over their errors. Early achievements echo longer than later failures. Trust accumulates. Authority outlasts performance. In this way, power sustains itself even when merit fluctuates. Crucially, this pull is rarely enforced. Most people choose to align themselves with power. Ambitious individuals, partners, financiers, and even rivals often seek proximity to share in its momentum. This voluntary attachment is one of the strongest defenses entrenched power has. It is upheld not only by control, but by collective choice and habit. Seen clearly, power's persistence stops seeming mysterious. Influence is not built on effort alone. It depends on positioning, access, perception, and the ability to shape systems and stories. When enough of these elements converge, power develops its own pull. The most enduring figures are those who understand not just how to succeed, but how to let success compound itself. This understanding carries moral weight. Power can be exercised to create stability, opportunity, and shared progress, or it can be concentrated, exploited, and used to block others. Those who grasp how influence perpetuates itself also inherit responsibility for how that influence reshapes the environment around them. In the end, the rule is straightforward. Power generates more power. Once influence crosses a certain threshold, it attracts loyalty, resources, and attention in an accelerating loop. This explains why leaders persist, institutions endure, and hierarchies harden. It also explains why anyone seeking influence must think systemically, building power with intention, integrity, and awareness of the forces that sustain it. Power is magnetic. When achieved and positioned correctly, it draws everything nearby into its field, sustaining itself through psychological, social, and structural means. Understanding this dynamic completes the picture of how influence grows, spreads, and rarely fades without deliberate effort to counter it. Closing reflection. Apply the 10 reasons power begets power. You've just explored the 10 reasons power accumulates. Momentum builds. Chapter 1. Access opens doors. 2. Networks form around influence. 3. Credibility compounds. 4. Resources shape outcomes. 5. Social proof reinforces hierarchy. 6. Systems protect leaders. 7. Wealth amplifies impact. 8. Narratives shape reality. 9. And ultimately, power attracts more power. 10. These reasons aren't abstract. They form a cycle. Visibility creates trust. Trust opens opportunities. Opportunities build alignment. Alignment generates momentum. And momentum fuels more influence. To make these principles part of your life, listen to this audiobook again. Each replay reinforces the patterns, embeds the insights, and lets you internalize the strategies so that momentum works for you naturally. Apply credibility, networks, access, and alignment intentionally. Build influence ethically, and small advantages will compound into real power. Power is not just earned, it is cultivated, amplified, and sustained. Use these 10 reasons thoughtfully and watch your influence grow.